5 things that you have to know about going to trial. I'm Dan Christensen with DJC Law. First thing, the jury doesn't get to hear about insurance. The jury never understands or never knows that the person who's at fault in this car wreck, the person who ran into you and hurt you, is insured, nor do they get to hear how much insurance they have. They're in the courtroom, they're looking across the courtroom, they see this little old lady at counsel table that you have sued, and they're left with the impression that this little old lady is going to be the one that has to pay the verdict. They don't know that there's actually a multi-billion-dollar insurance company that's standing in the way of this thing getting resolved and is actually the one that's going to be the one that pays this verdict. They think the little old lady is. They think she's calling the shots, when in reality, it's the big insurance company that's calling the shots. The jury never gets to hear that. The second thing that you've got to know, the jury never hears out of the verdict, the plaintiff has to pay the attorney and also has to pay the case expenses to take the case to prosecution. And this obviously can result in the plaintiff getting little to nothing out of the verdict. Let me give you an example. Let's say the jury gives the plaintiff $100,000, but the plaintiff has $40,000 in medical expenses that has to be paid. Then, of course, $40,000 of it has to go to the lawyer and attorney's fee. And let's say that there's $20,000 that has to be paid in case expenses in order to take the case to trial. So out of that $100,000, the plaintiff got a big fat zero. The jury has no idea that that's what's going on because we're not allowed to tell the jury that there's X amount of case expenses that had to be spent because the defendant insurance company refused to pay even a dollar on the case, so the plaintiff had to put that money toward prosecuting the case. We're not allowed to talk about that, and we're not allowed to talk about the fact that the plaintiff has to pay 40% of the verdict to their lawyer. The third thing that you need to know about personal injury lawsuits is that in a lot of jurisdictions, there's what's called damage caps.
Now that's a lot of damage!
There can be a cap, that is a limitation on the certain types of damages, like punitive damages. There can even be a cap on ordinary damages in certain jurisdictions.
Holy, look at all this damage!
Again, the jury may give a certain award in a case thinking that that's what the plaintiff's going to get, but there's going to be a statute that's laying in the background that they don't even know about, and that statute is going to end up knocking down their verdict, even though they don't have any idea that it's there, because we don't inform them of that during the jury trial. The fourth thing that you've got to know, the jury can give an award, but the judge can on his own, whether he's asked to do this or not, he can step in after the verdict, and he can reduce that verdict through what's called a remitter. In fact, this is what happened in the McDonald's hot coffee case. The judge can just, if he thinks the damaged verdict is too high, he can just reduce it to what he thinks it should be. The jury never knows that happens. So the jury thinks they're doing justice. They make a certain award, never understanding or never learning later on that the plaintiff wasn't going to get that amount because of what the judge did. The fifth and final thing that you've got to know, when the jury gives an award, if the award is sizable at all, most likely the defense is going to appeal that award. They're going to file a notice of appeal after trial, and then a whole nother round of negotiation occurs. And most likely, and in most cases, the plaintiff ends up having to settle for far less than the amount of the verdict, simply to avoid the risk of an appeal. Again, the jury thinks they're doing one thing, but what ends up happening in the end is far different.
Are you sure about that?
So a lot of people, when I talk to them about this sort of thing, they're shocked. And they realize that all of these rules that we've talked about, all of these things that you didn't know, they all work against the plaintiff. They're normally left with the reaction, well, that doesn't really sound fair. And you know what? You're absolutely right. It's not fair. And it's not going to be fair until we vote somebody else into office. So for the time being, if your case is going to trial, these are things that you've got to know and things that you have to take into consideration when you're evaluating whether you should accept a settlement offer or not. Yes, not terribly fair, but it is what it is. If you want to know more about personal injury lawsuits, suing insurance companies, follow DJC Law.